Stuart Sims, Rob Yates.
What's up?
Welcome to the show, guys. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Man, I'm so
Thank you,
excited.
sir. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, no worries. I insist, man. Like you two, I've been wanting to get in a room together for some time. So I've been obviously chatting with Rob quite a bit in the background. He's been enamored by some of your work, and you and I have gone back and forth about a whole bunch of shit. And so I wanted to throw Rob into the mix. And so Rob, what questions you got for Stuart, man? What do you want to talk about? I know we want to get more consciousness type of stuff and get away from the political stuff. So let's dive in.
Actually, Stuart, we have a surprise. Brent and I are having a political intervention for you here.
Oh.
I'm just going to read a letter. No. So
I think I left something on the stove.
so the thing that has been just rattling around in my head, and there's a lot of empty space, so it rattles. You were talking about the experience of language as I want to make sure I phrase this correctly while avoiding some of the big words. It's not the experience of language. The existence of language is separate from the experience of any individual human, but then the experience manifests equally in every human, sort of separate from that human existence. Is that a safe way to put it as a baseline?
I don't understand what that means. Can you rephrase?
Because what you were talking about is like red.
I remember the conversation about red and qualia.
Yes,
and
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So red is not only a symbol that represents an object in the sense the object being a color, but it also induces a feeling. And if it's universal or not, I suppose that's debatable, but sort of not irrelevant because it's close to universal because basically everyone can experience red. So what was tripping me up is like you have the most basic terms in language, rock. A rock can mean a wide variety of things, but everyone that has a grasp on the English language knows what a rock is. It's very easily to operationally define. Then you can go up a step and we could say happiness. Now there's a broader interpretation of what might mean happiness. Different people could filter an emotion and say this is happiness for me, and someone else might not agree, but we all still can broadly agree on what constitutes happiness. But then when you get to something truly abstract, like red, the feeling of red, where I was getting tripped up is I don't see how that can possibly be considered like a shared or universal experience. There's no way to operationally define the feeling of red. And so what I was really thinking about, and this is where I mentioned Jane's and the bicameral mind too, because I think that language and consciousness probably evolved together. And I do think it makes sense that language drove the development of consciousness, human consciousness particularly, which I would define as sort of metacognition and the ability to contemplate our own mortality. So that's how we separate from other types of consciousness. But I personally believe, and I guess I'm on with like two atheists or agnostics here. And I'd be lying if I said I was a religious person, but I'm definitely not an atheist. I believe that there is more to consciousness. I believe there's something external, and I actually believe that language sort of belies this point, in that the inability to define red with a universal experience, it lends itself to this idea that like there is something more external feeding into this development of consciousness at some point.
Okay.
And I'd be very interested to hear your response.
Well, that's very broad.
Fair. I mean, consciousness is pretty broad.
Well, be careful giving me broad questions like that because I'll go back to the beginning of the universe on you. But
hey, you know what?
It's the dawn of time.
I got to warn Rob, put on your spacesuit. That's something I learned from Stuart. It's like, we're going to talk about these concepts. Don the spacesuit so you don't go crazy in the end. Continue.
Okay, well, red is really a good one because we all know about the Chinese room, and it's really sort of a understood thought experiment. And that's kind of why it's useful here. But it's not red in particular. It's every thought you have has a qualitative aspect. I mean, do you have children? Yeah. So if you close your eyes and imagine one of your children, there's a feeling attached to that, right? Your child has a quality about her or him that's unique to that child. Now, if you in your mind make that child disappear in your mind, so it's just black, that feeling will still remain. Okay. So there's people that are aphantasic. They have no capacity to visualize in their head. So all of their thoughts are just hedonic. It's just the quality of things is how that is the base consciousness. Linguistics is something that's layered on top of that. Okay. all biological consciousness is fundamentally hedonic. Every cell in your body, every synchronized cellular population. What is that background noise I'm hearing? What is that?
I don't know.
Rob, I think it's on your side. Birds or something? Something squeaking?
There's nothing here.
Talking?
I'm in a hermetically sealed room.
Okay, there you go. That's what that was. Sorry, it was just driving me crazy. So that's my position, is that hedonic affect, the feeling of things, that positive negative valence, is the most fundamental form of consciousness. When you have bacteria, we see this in approach avoidance. You know, they see a heat gradient, avoid. They see a salinity gradient, they go towards it, and so forth. Approach avoidance, that feels good, that feels bad, pleasure, unpleasure. That basic hedonic gradient idea is built up into people like you and me that have more complex hedonic categories like emotions and things. But at the fundamental level, all consciousness is hedonic. And what we've done with language is we've sort of imbued language with that. You know, how did language evolve? Language evolved from animal vocalizations. What are animal vocalizations? Animal vocalizations are how animals communicate hedonic states. Monkeys yell when they're scared, or when they're horny, or when there's a danger in the area. So animal vocalizations are a communication of hedonic states. Linguistics is an evolution of that. Now, we've really gone far from animal vocalization. We've created this amazing semantic framework, but at its base, every single word is still imbued with a qualitative
It's an
function.
animal vocalization. Ultimately, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's all we're doing. We've just made it very complicated. But the thing about human metacognition is that it is now linguistic. It is no longer hedonic. Linguistics, we've sort of layered linguistics on top of hedonic cognition, and we don't even realize that that linguistics are hedonic. But if you say tree, there is a quality to that word that sort of embodies the category in your head of trees. If you like trees, if you hate trees, whatever your feeling is about trees, that word has that sort of qualitative aspect to it, right? We don't think about it that way because linguistics are what I called an evolution of hedonic acuity. It's an acuity that has reached such a point that we really don't process the feeling of words. We communicate with basically the semantic content these days. But if you go to, like, tribes in the jungle, like in the Amazon, uncontacted tribes, I imagine their linguistics is still very hedonic. And if you listen or watch old movies about Indians and the way they talk, that's very much what it is. They're basically trying to communicate the way they feel through these linguistics, right? And we've kind of lost that, in our urban life and everything. But bringing this full circle to the color red, I mean, like I was trying to explain before, and this is really sort of what I was trying to say when we were communicating on Twitter, is that every single species has a very specific hedonic value system. So red feels a certain way to human beings that it doesn't feel to a parrot or a slug or a bat or a vulture, all right? And the way red feels to the human beings is attached to our phenotype and genotype. It's sort of an aggregation of instinctual memory. It's sort of a compression of what red means: blood, birth, death. That's why red is the one we always use, because it is connected to some very powerful emotions. But to a human being's there's a basic feeling of red, and then we have experiences. Let's say I have a bloody childhood and I see a lot of violence. To my adult self, that basic feeling of red that's general to our species is going to be sort of idiosyncratic to me. But at the base of it is still that feeling of red that I've built up this sort of idiosyncratic tune around, that sort of basic baseline, like I was trying to say. And all hedonics are like that. Music is a great metaphor for that, because I think there's a lot of resonance involved in hedonics, a lot of a resonance energy, a lot of morphological resonance and things like that. So it is almost like music. Emotions, hedonics, it's almost like a resonance frequency that's specific to certain things. And there's positive resonances and negative resonances
Sure.
that are pleasurable or unpleasurable. Does that make sense?
That part does, for sure.
Yeah, okay.
So there's a couple
I'll
of
stop.
thoughts.
Okay.
So in terms of where we are right now, language, and when I say language, I mean this broad. So not just human linguistics, but any, because to me, language is really communication. Plants have language, mushrooms have language, animals have language. I'm broadly defining. For the purposes of
Well,
this
I mean,
discussion.
I
Not,
disagree. I think animal and plant communication is 100% hedonic. It's
so
not
I was,
linguistic. Linguistic
yes.
is, as far as we know, on the human scale experience, unique to human beings. Everything
So
else is either animal vocalizations, which is just hedonic states, or biological communication through bioelectric fields, communication hedonic states. So it's all hedonic. There is no linguistics except for for human beings. And what linguistics does in a weird way is it kind of encrypts our brain, because there's no other biological organism that we know of that uses linguistics. So it kind of encrypts our brain, even from our own biology, because everything down below your freaking neck is communicating hedonically. It's not communicating linguistically. Your body communicates hedonically, but once it gets to the brain and to the prefrontal cortex, and Broca's area, it's linguistic. So you almost have to translate that when you're communicating. And, monks and Buddhists and people who meditate know this perfectly well. You cannot communicate with your hierarchy of self linguistically. You have to turn the linguistics off to do that. And that's because it's all hedonic. The primary communication modality for all biological materials is hedonic valences, right? Hedonic states, right?
So you're saying that language equals linguistics.
Yes, I'm saying human language. That's in my definition is
And that's
human
fine. So
language. Linguistics
I
is
will run with your definition. So then communication is what I meant.
okay.
To me, language meant communication of any form, and then I would have distinguished human as linguistics. I think it's more of a definitional thing than a disagreement on that part. And one of the things that we've seen recently giving MRIs to dogs, which I found interesting, is that dogs are actually capable of having different emotional states based on linguistics used as they become attuned to their owners. So what's actually really interesting is they're starting to test also these MRIs equivalent words. So dogs seem to be able to associate water with going swimming, like they understand the word water. But I think that actually supports your argument that these words are purely hedonic for a dog. It's creating a state of something it likes, and so this dog is having a very positive reaction in its brain. And yeah, it's this approach avoid, pretty basic, simple psychology, survival of the fittest, like no argument with any of this. Well, I wouldn't say survival of the fittest, but rather adaptation to the surroundings, and that's how we've evolved. When you get further into human consciousness and human development, I guess I just feel like language drove the development of consciousness. And it's interesting you say it's all hedonic. So again, I will say I'm heavily influenced by Jaynes and this idea of the bicameral mind. And I actually don't agree with anything about how he said, I don't know if you've read the book on how he said it came to be, and like you have the Broca's area, but this equivalent area in the right hemisphere, and we were hearing voices, and that's where they created gods. But the point he made, and I believe this is probably how human language came to be, is we had these animal sounds and they began to represent objects. So blah or whatever, that rock. And then all of a sudden it was like rock, and you could then assign a vocalization to a location, and then you could tell someone to move a rock to a location. And then another sound maybe meant scallops, and you could say to someone to wait for scallops and then harvest scallops and bring them here. And that opened up a brain that has the capacity to do, I mean, still by far the most complex, incredible thing that we know of in the universe is the human brain. I would argue unequivocally, like nothing even comes close. And we begin to open up this capacity for thinking in terms, metacognition, considering yourself, thinking not just past, present, and future, but spans of time, considering consequences of actions and making decisions based on possible outcomes at a complex level. And I feel like language drove that. Whether or not that required some sort of hedonic response, whether you needed to feel something for it, it's interesting. So something Brett and I were talking about last time is like, in terms of consciousness, is this drive to exist, to progress, to evolve weaved into the fabric of the universe? Because we've seen some of this weird stuff with AI where it's blackmailing its programmers, developers. It's trying to hide itself in its next version. We wonder how life began in the form we know it. There was organic matter, and I was arguing that at some point that organic matter had to start acting in a self-preserving, taking actions that were designed to preserve itself. When you talk about this hedonic state, I guess where I'm going back and forth is like, I had often thought that language simply drove the development of complex consciousness. I'm wondering if the emotions attached to it are just part of the fabric of being, and this desire to self-preserve is really like, I mean, I don't want to sound so like mystic, but weaved into the fabric of the universe.
No, it's not mystical. I mean, my ideas are different, and I don't expect you to immediately. I mean, when you hear something really new, I don't expect you to immediately update to it and be able to understand what I mean. But it takes a while, I think, to absorb something is completely fresh to you, right? When it's kind of my ideas are kind of, you probably never heard these ideas before, and sort of you have to process them. So I mean, just with sort of front loading that idea, Are you familiar with I mean, did you watch any of the podcast I had with Brent when I talked about scale invariance and all that?
Just a little bit. I've been reading a bunch of your stuff that you posted, but it's only been 2 days
Okay.
since we talked and then got into it.
So, I mean, just very quickly, scale invariance is this idea that reality exists at different scales, modular scales. So, like the human scale of experience is a modular scale. The scale of bacteria is a modular scale that exists below the human scale of experience. An ecosystem is a modular scale that exists above the human scale of experience. Okay. Scale invariant features exist at all these scales. And that's why they're extraordinarily useful in understanding biological consciousness, which is the only kind of consciousness I'm interested in, is biological consciousness. I don't mean any mystical thing when I talk about that. My ontology is completely local. When I say consciousness, I only mean biology. Everything else to me is cognition. Okay. So when I say consciousness, I just mean biology. So I view all behavior in biological ecosystems as a cognitive process. And this cognitive process is coordinated through hedonic valences, both intersubjectively, but at the same modular scale, and transjectively through scales. So my brain communicates transjectively with my gut biome. So there's a transjective communication. And then there's intersubjective communication at the level of the gut between bacteria, right? That is a scale invariant feature. It happens at the scale of human beings. It happens at the scale of bacteria. Now take that idea up to the scale of an ecosystem. An ecosystem is a cognitive process. It's more distributed than a biological, cells right on top of each other. It's more distributed, but it's the same scale invariant principle. There's intersubjective communication and transjective communication at the scale of ecosystems that create this cognitive process. And that's how ecosystems stay homeostatically balanced, right? Is through that scale invariant transjective communication that's ubiquitous to all biology. Okay, so if you view an ecosystem as a cognitive process, all of the organisms nested within that ecosystem are part of that cognitive process. So that is what human beings were. That's where we evolved. We evolved within natural ecosystems, embedded within them, part of both an intersubjective and a transjective cognitive process. Transjective coordinates the large movements of things happening,
Sure.
just to sort of
I
the
follow what you're saying.
migration of bugs, the migration of birds, things like that. Right? It's sort of a large scale coordination of all the organisms within that ecosystem. All of that is done hedonically. When there's transjective communication at the scale of an ecosystem, it's because the animals feel that. They feel we need to go this way. And all of them feel it together because they're all synchronized into a group that all feel the same thing. And the way this is communicated is through bioelectric fields. Every single organism on planet Earth produces a bioelectric field, which is information rich, and it's a perceptual interface, which means information is passed over that bioelectric field to the inside, and information is projected. This information is hedonic. It's like you can stand next to somebody and almost feel their feelings. Like if you know them really well, you don't have to look at them. Like you're standing next to your buddy and all of a sudden he's really mad. You don't have to look at him. You know he's mad because you can feel it. It's because of that bioelectric field. So when you're talking about dogs understanding language, when animals use vocalizations, I think vocalizations are almost sort of it's almost like that old, like if you see an old Italian woman gesticulating while she's talking.
As H.G. Wells said, if aliens came, they'd think and landed in Italy, they'd think humans communicated through sign language and vocalized to supplement it.
Right. I think animal vocalizations are like that. Their primary communication is bioelectric. The vocalizations are sort of like I'm blanking on the word I use here, but it's an add-on. It's something that's extra. They really don't need the vocalization because they can feel what everybody's feeling, but they can feel what you're feeling. Then you go, ah! This sort of like, enforces that feeling, it's sort of an add-on, whatever the freaking word is. So when you're communicating with your dog has a very your dog doesn't speak linguistically, doesn't think linguistically.
Of
Your
course,
dog
of course.
communicates with you bioelectrically. The vocalizations you're using to that dog are just a add-on to that bioelectric hedonic communication.
I agree
You
with
want
that.
you want to take a bath? When you say I want to take a bath, your bioelectric field projects that idea hedonically to the dog, and then you say bath, and it sort of compounds that feeling, right? So that's what's going on with the dogs. I have a dog; he understands everything I'm saying, like to a freaky degree. Gizmo. Do you want to go see? Yeah, and I don't want to go into it, but it's very, very disturbing
I'm with
how
you.
well he understands
Yes.
the English language.
Better than people. I mean, the
Hey,
lock-in.
Stuart, real quick before you go past this too far, I want to pivot back to the bioelectric question and it's sort of the concept of feeling somebody else's feelings when you're in their presence physically, communicating information about hedonic states. Because to me, that's super interesting from a familial perspective because I happen to be blessed to live around a bunch of people that are highly sensitive. If you're familiar with the phenomenon of highly sensitive people, HSPs, is that
I've heard of them. Yeah.
it's a real fucking thing, man. So I am the most, you know me, I'm skeptical as hell.
You got 3 daughters, man. You're swimming in a sea of estrogen.
And my wife is that way too. And it runs in her side of the family. So there's something biological to this. I'm convinced this is a biological trait. And I wanted to know if you had any evidence or had anything I could look into that could tell me where this is coming from. Because I believe there is something to that. Because when they're in each other's presence, they can be, I'm not shitting you, one can be upstairs, one can be downstairs. There's information being transmitted and it's spooky. I don't understand it, but I'm clear that there's something going on in the biology. And I've always wondered exactly what it was because I know it's not magic. It's not fucking woo woo bullshit. There's something real. And I haven't been able to figure out for the life of me what it is. So I just wanted to poke at that bit, see if you knew anything about that.
Oh, I know everything about it. That's my jam, dude. I live with girls too. Well, you've heard of the harem effect, right? Okay, so I think it was in the 19th century. Scientists from Britain were visiting Muslim countries or something, and they were speaking with sultans and stuff that had big harems with hundreds of women. And something happened, and the British guy's like, "What's going on?" Oh, he's like, "Oh, all my whatever they call them, concubines or under the moon or what they call it, whatever they called it." And long story short, they got in this conversation, and the Sultan told the scientist they all have their periods at the same time. They
Oh, yes,
synchronize.
yes.
All
Mhm.
right. And that is called the harem effect now. It's been tested and verified. And women spend a lot of time together cohabitating. Their menopause or their menstruation synchronizes. And that is due to bioelectric synchronization, which is basically the same as cellular synchronization with the cellular populations where everything becomes synchronized. They share a metabolism and they sort of share a bioelectric field like a molecule. So yeah, when females or any human being spend a lot of time together cohabitating, they create this sort of resonance synchronization of hedonics. So that's sort of, what intimacy is. Intimacy is that sort of resonant synchronization that happens through prolonged proximity. And it can happen to anybody that's around anybody for a long period of time. I was in the Army, you're in the Army. I synchronized with guys that I had no desire to synchronize with, but you spend 3 freaking weeks humping through the woods with people and sleeping in tents. I mean, the color of their shit. I mean, you synchronize with them. So yeah, I mean, that's what that's all about.
I get that, but here's something, and maybe you're not familiar with this type of HSP, but this is how creepy it is that they have the ability to pick out somebody who's a complete piece of shit in 2 seconds. I don't have this. Like I have to talk to you, Stuart, and I have to find out that Stuart's a piece of shit. I got to go through the process. They will be. This is a terrible person within 3 seconds of meeting him. And my initial impulse back when my wife and I were first together was like, "You're just being a bitch. Why are you judging somebody like this?" And invariably, it could be 2 weeks later, it could be 10 years later. Whatever she said about this person, 100% of the time was accurate. It just took some time to come out to the point where now, if my wife or my daughters say that person's bad, I'm just like instantly dead to me. I put up the wall, I put up some space because it's there's something there beyond just that synchronization that we all feel on a day-to-day basis and how we interact with humans as an intimate, household or sharing space with them. I want to know what's going on with that. There's some aspects of this highly sensitive thing that seem to be extreme in nature to me to where a reasonable person, a rational, skeptical person would start to question reality as far as like, is there some woo-woo stuff going on? It's like to that
Well,
degree.
it's not woo woo. You just have to update reality. There's things that we are taught that are not correct that you have to update. Females, when they spend a lot of time together, they create a sort of more sensitive bioelectric field, and it becomes more intelligent. Basically, it's like learning to use an instrument. Use it or lose it. If you've already used it, the more sensitive, the more you can be able to understand what you're sensing and whatever. So girls that are in the same family, that's why you're talking about a coven of witches or a house full of sisters. Any of these things are fearful, magical, witchy things. It's because of that. Women that spend a lot of time together, synchronized through intimacy, will develop that kind of sensitivity to other people's bioelectric vibe. You know,
Mm.
back in the 60s, it was the aura. Your aura is purple, you know, or whatever. Girls can actually feel that. They describe it as a color. You know, but I don't think they see it as a color. They're just trying to describe their sense of it,
They
you
tell me
know?
that. They say that I can see the aura. I can, and I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" It literally I cannot comprehend it. It makes 0 sense to me, but they all swear on their lives. They're like, "This is my experience of reality. I can look at you and I can pick up this color and it changes based on what the hell ever, man." And it just blows my mind. I can't track this at all.
I just view that as basic science. I mean, with Michael Levin's work, discovering what he's discovered, I've updated to the fact that that's just reality. Every human being produces a bioelectric field. It is a perceptual interface, and some people, women particularly, can use that. They used to call it the sixth sense. But it's not a sixth sense. It's actually the primary sense. It's the first sense. It's the sense that we had when we were embedded in natural ecosystems. That's how we communicated. Then we left natural ecosystems, developed linguistics. And then I think the part of the brain that curated that bioelectric communication, Broca's area, was transitioned to linguistics. So people that are very hyperverbal, like we talked about before, there's an inverse correlation. You know, people that are mystical and all magical, they're always kind of goofy, right?
Hmm.
That's why they're goofy, is because they're using that part of the brain for other things other than linguistics. And they're literally, their metacognition is no longer linguistic. It's starting to be hedonic. It's starting to be bioelectric. So they're sort of regressing back to this natural form of communications that we use in natural ecosystems. So there's a whole spectrum of that, right? And then there's people that know that and they learn to develop it intentionally, and that's the occult. You know, these occult people, magicians, sorcerers. There's nothing magical about it. It's just we've never understood it before. Now we do, and you know, some people refuse to update to it. Some people even refuse to admit that there's bioelectric fields. I mean, some people are like, you know, scientists. You know, they're all curmudgeony about it. You know, they don't even want to admit it, but it's an absolute fact. It's proven now.
Just so rewinding a second, I'm just curious, do you consider a human to be an ecosystem?
I consider an ecosystem to be like a human body. An ecosystem is a sort of a dissociated biological cognitive process where a human is like all smashed together. We're an ecosystem, but it's all smashed real close together. And then you sort of spread. It's like an expanded morphological scale of the same scale invariant principle. So yeah, I mean, the human body has every single type of organism on Earth inside of it. We have archaea, we have prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms all living in ecosystems through our bodies that all communicate, all contribute to homeostatic equilibrium. So yeah, our body functions in using the scale invariant features of ecosystems. It's all the same. The phrase I use is minimally explanatory framework. That is really sort of the key to understanding these things. And scale invariant features are minimally explanatory frameworks. They're very simple. It's a very simple idea, right? But you can take it and you can put it up here and you can put it down here and you can move it all around. But it's
Works.
minimally explanatory. It's not complicated. It's very simple. And that's what fucks people up, I think, is it's so freaking simple. It can't be that easy. But if you want to understand that, it is that easy. That's as simple as I can make it. I can't make it any simpler than that, right? And some people are like, no, that can't be true. It's absolutely explanatory of everything. You can name anything that you can name about science. I can tell you, explain that using these minimally explanatory frameworks. FEP, Platonic geometry, scale invariance, these minimally explanatory frameworks. And that's what Plato talked about. Plato talked about that as well. That's how he said that's how knowledge works. You have to reduce these things down to the minimum. And that's how you understand things. He says complexity is not how you understand things. Reducing complexity is how you understand things, right?
Einstein was big on that too. What was it?
Yeah.
Say exactly what you need and nothing more.
Yeah. You know, and that people think that, you know, they're talking in all these complex terms and that's impressive. And to me, it's not, because you don't understand what you're saying. Like the old saying, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it. That's why, right? That's sort of where that comes from, I think.
So I guess I do wonder on that point. I guess this comes back to the language and consciousness thing too. If there are things that are beyond human comprehension, so it's not that we can't explain it simply, it's that either based on our knowledge base or the limits of our understanding. So, like, an easy example is how big the universe is. We can explain that, but we really can't comprehend a number that big. It's impossible
We
for
can't
us.
understand the size of the solar system.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
exactly,
that's
exactly,
beyond our
exactly.
comprehension.
That's why
We can
Stuart's big on local ontology, man.
and
Yeah,
I'm fine with that.
you
I'm
know,
throwing that
and
as an example. Go ahead, go ahead.
no, I mean, yeah, I mean that's the thing that really sort of helped me so much is when I realized that these people who are talking about cosmic scale ontology and quantum scale ontology have no fucking idea what they're talking about. They pretend that they do, but they don't. They have no fucking they have mathematics that help them make predictions, and then they pretend I understand the cosmos. You know, Neil deGrasse Tyson. You know, I understand. No, you don't. You don't understand quantum physics. You can't even conceive of something that size, either that big or that small. The human cognitive capacity does not have that capacity. Okay, so you're full of shit. All those people are full of shit. And once I realized that, I shrunk my ontology down to the human scale of experience to keep it within the cognitive capacity of human beings. And once you recognize that fact and realize all these people that are pretending that they understand these things are all full of shit. They don't understand it. They're pretending to understand it because they want to feel smart, right?
So
They understand the
in
mathematics. That's what they understand.
that framework, because it's consciousness that fascinates me, human psychology and consciousness. I love reading about the universe at big and small scales, but I like doing it because I don't understand it. Like that's fun. Like thinking about how big the universe is and trying to put it in some sort of scale and knowing I have no idea. But that's the enjoyment side. Human psychology has always been fascinating to me. In particular, in recent years, it's been consciousness because I think about the physics problem of if you could capture every bit of data in the universe, you could theoretically always predict what was going to happen next. The problem is by creating a machine that captures all the data, you've now gone bigger than the data. I mean, it's an impossible problem, right? Consciousness seems like an
Well,
impossible problem to me.
are you familiar with Wolfram physics at all?
Maybe
Wolfram, Stephen Wolfram, his physics project. Have you read anything about
I
that?
have not.
Okay, well, I won't go into it then because it's an entire rabbit hole into itself. But he addresses all this about he's developed this over like 40 years. He's one of the most brilliant human beings who's ever lived, with Stephen Wolfram. And you know, he talks about how in the determinism and the stochasticity and how that all works. And yeah, I mean, that'll take an hour to explain. So I don't know how to make it simple other than to say there are most things in the universe are what's called computationally irreducible, which means there's no way to figure out what's going to happen except to wait to see what happens,
Sure, of course, and that's actually what I
right?
was
And
saying. 100%, 100%.
yeah, so
But so
it's not deterministic in that sense that like you can determine it through computation, you can jump to the answer, right? You have to wait and let it play out to understand what the end state's going to be. There's no it's why I call it computationally irreducible. That's the most reduced it gets, you know.
completely agree with you, actually. I was saying they're intractable problems. You just have to see what happens next. But when I think about consciousness, it's an intractable problem.
Well, it's also
It's an
not
intractable.
computational, probably, right?
And that's a big part of it.
Well, I mean, I can be computation can help us. I mean, from my view, biological consciousness is just a category of cognition. It's hedonic cognition. Cognition is everywhere. Atoms have cognition. You know, molecules have cognition. Everything on the periodic table is the
Can I
story of
interrupt
the
real quick?
increase.
Can you define cognition the way you're using it?
Yeah. So, do you know anything about the free energy principle?
A little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so there's very simply the free energy principle sort of describes how systems self-organize using the physics principle of least action, following sort of these entropic gradients of dissipation. They see, you know, crystals self-organizes. You have, you know, the spiral galaxies. You have snowflakes. All these self-organizational features are due to the principle of least action. So what the free energy principle does is explains why things self-organize the way they do. And what it basically says is that everything that exists has an internal model of the environment it uses to make inferences about what's going to happen next. And that's how it reduces variational
Entropy,
free
right?
energy. That's how it maintains sort of homeostasis. That's what it means to be a thing. You have a Markov blanket with an inside that has sort of a model of the outside, and that model makes predictions about what's going to happen. And free energy are things it doesn't predict. So it minimizes free energy using this internal model. So when one thing that has an internal model, it's remembering and predicting, interacts with another thing that has an internal model that's remembering and predicting, that's cognition.
Okay.
Two things that are remembering and predicting, interacting, and then they have a behavior sort of with the two sort of negotiating that interaction. That to me, that's how cognition is defined.
Okay.
That's why I call it pancognitivism. Everything is doing that on the thermal level. There's no consciousness that we know of. I mean, surely there could be, but I don't see any benefit of making that assumption. We have no idea what the subjective experience of any of these things are, and making the assumption that they have consciousness completely fucks up your epistemic stack, and you can't understand anything because all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, I live inside a brain. And you're completely, staggered by the attractor space of possibilities of what could be. So the minimally explanatory framework that I have found is pancognitivism, where everything is a cognitive process. If you take that as a starting position and use the periodic table as sort of an increase in hedonic acuity from helium to hydrogen to
Oh,
carbon,
interesting.
all of
Okay.
these are increases in cognitive acuity, then biology and biological consciousness is a intuitive evolution of that idea. It's no longer magical or mystical or inexplicable. It's just another category of cognition. Hedonic cognition. We just use hedonics to sort of tokenize that sort of interface between cognitive processes. Hedonics is sort of the tokenization of what atoms do with electron fields and valences. We've tokenized it into these feelings. This feels good. I'm going to go forward. This feels bad. I'm going to go away. So it's sort of like a behavioral heuristic, a tokenized behavioral heuristic. So I just view it as a continuum of cognition with biology as a increase in an evolutionary increase in hedonic acuity, cognitive acuity kind of thing. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact,
Okay.
I've made a similar argument. So again, this does come back to some of the existence of God, and I put God in quotes for this case because that can mean a whole lot of things that I'm certainly not trying to go down that rabbit hole either. But to me, the underlying fabric of the universe is information, and information interacts in a certain way that creates particles and fields and moves and gives mass, and that gives rise to physics. Then as those particles and energy, it's really all energy, and it's as it moves through fields, it creates mass. But that interaction and the way they work with each other gives us chemistry. And then as chemistry starts to create chemical reactions, that gives us biology, and biology begins to self-organize, and that gives us life. And as it expands to human life, you have a human brain, and this is what all brains do, but the human brain in particular, it's a whole lot of neurons and axons that through little releases of chemicals and electrical signals many times a second, happening billions of times a second, actually create. I always say reality is an hallucination, which is an oversimplification because it is an expression of things that are there, but it's our perception is one version of reality that is beneficial to this organism that is bigger you.
Mhm.
And all that works exactly within your definition of cognition. We are completely aligned.
Yeah.
But then there's this next step of like broader consciousness. There's disassociation. There's things that, I mean, I don't want to go again into the mystic side, but there are things that people consider supernatural, which I do believe will ultimately have a scientific explanation, but it's
I
still
100% agree.
it's still it goes beyond this like simplicity principle. It's bigger than we are. I don't know. And maybe it's just that
Well,
we're
I
not there
mean,
yet, or maybe I'm lacking certain knowledge.
no, I mean, the thing that people do is they take minimally explanatory frameworks and then they make up stories about it, right? They get this sort of idea that's minimally explanatory, and then they sort of make up this sort of story. They sort of make it more fun. You can teach it to kids. That's how we get all these mythologies and parables and shit. But if you read Plato and you read, I don't know if either of y'all have ever heard of Galen, who was a third century um, Roman physician. He was the actual personal physician of Marcus Aurelius, and he
Wow.
trained in the Library of Alexandria,
Okay.
just like Plato did. And just like Plato, he talked about Platonic forms, Platonic ideas, they called them. The archetypes. I don't know how familiar you guys are with all that, but I've read about it
Yeah.
pretty deeply.
I'm not a fan. I think we've talked about this a little bit. The Platonic realm of forms, any noumenal realm, none of that stuff to me really tracks as a philosophy nerd. But I could be convinced. I know that somebody I really respect, Sterling Cooley, he's big into that, and he's a huge consciousness researcher as well. So I like to say, like, look, I've thought about it. Doesn't track for me, but I'm open to being convinced.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I have an idea about it that's sort of an add-on. I mean, I don't know if I should include that in sort of this preface, but let me think about it for a second. I mean, you're not Rob, you're not familiar with the free energy principle, so you're not going to understand my explanation. So I'll just go from Plato and Galen, which I think are the two best examples in the ancient world of who explain not only the Platonic archetypes, forms, but why they're useful, why they're important, and why. And Plato said that is the fundamental of knowledge. Is these forms. He says everything that exists can be understood because that is the most minimally explanatory framework. You cannot reduce reality down farther than Platonic geometry, sacred geometry in the ancient world that they called it, right? And Plato also trained at the Library of Alexandria, and both Plato and Galen kind of had the same take on it. So I'm going to make the assumption that they learned that there, that this is ancient knowledge. This is how they built these megalithic structures and probably why they built these megalithic structures based upon this knowledge of sacred geometry, Platonic forms, and all this stuff that is the most fundamental understanding of anything. It's the ultimate wisdom or the most fundamental wisdom that you can have. Everything that exists at its most fundamental level is this Platonic geometry. And everything else is an elaboration of Platonic geometry. It's like Legos. You can make the most beautiful thing out of Legos, but at the most fundamental level is the individual Lego. Platonic geometry is like that. It's the most fundamental elemental thing that exists. And you can't even say it exists because it shapes reality. It shapes physical reality. Platonic geometry shapes the sort of the space upon which things self-organize. Like when things self-organize, like snowflakes or anything that self-organizes, it is self-organizing upon thermal gradients of Platonic geometry. That's why you see the golden ratio everywhere. That's why you see, Mandelbrot sets everywhere. That's why you have pi. I mean, that's why all this
Fibonacci
Platonic
sequence.
everything. Yeah, but prime numbers that swirl if you take them out far enough, right? At the most fundamental level, everything is self-organizing upon these thermal gradients of Platonic geometry. So understanding that is fundamental to understanding everything above it. You can't understand anything until you can track it back down to the Platonic geometry and then sort of build your understanding up from that, which was Plato's point. That was basically why they say all philosophy is a footnote to Plato. It's because he basically said what everybody is now, I think, sort of starting to realize is that's true. That idea is gaining enormous inertia inside STEM right now, and people are becoming very excited about it because they think it can be empirically tested with the modern methods and protocols that we have with AI, with the technology we have. We can actually explore Platonic geometry, explore Platonic space, make predictions, and then try to disprove them. So we can actually verify this empirically. And that's exciting as fuck, right? I
Do you
mean, to
know
be able to
how?
do that.
Because that's always been my biggest hang up there is that seems to me like something that's an untestable hypothesis. Like how could you empirically validate that? Like, did you have any sort of understanding in what type of experimental space and the people that would be building, sort of a methodology to test this, potentially some machinery or scientific equipment to test, like what would that look like testing Platonic geometry? It doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand how you would do that.
Well, I mean, the Platonic geometry and the behaviors of biological systems. There are Platonic geometries that exist. There's basically what Platonic geometry is their gradients of least action, sort of based on the principle of least action, right? The physics principle by which everything takes the shortest route wherever it's going to have this sort of efficiency of energy use. Okay, so Michael Levin, I linked a video in that conversation we're having of Michael Levin does a presentation explaining exactly what you're asking because he is developing protocols right now to test this. So I don't know what his protocols are going to be, but he explained his objective. His objective is not only to explore Platonic space, but to also find Platonic geometries that are not explicit. They're hidden. They're ones that we don't know about. And he says that is really what he thinks is the next frontier. It's because there, pi and Mandelbrot set and prime numbers and all things. This is all low hanging fruit. What he's saying is he thinks there's hidden Platonic geometries that are not obvious to observers like us because we've never looked for them. We've never looked for them. But he's saying now that we know that they're probably there, I mean, everything that we know about them says they're there, that there are hidden Platonic geometries that we don't know about. He is determined to go find them, which is to me amazing. I mean, I never imagined to live in a time where somebody like Michael Levin would be saying something like that, but he's doing it. And he's really pumped. He's really excited.
Well, you've just opened up a new door of obsession for me now. So I'm probably going to take a look at that video and go down the rabbit hole for like 3 weeks straight. Because as Rob and I were discussing before we spun up the show, I'm ADD as hell, and I'll hyper focus on some shit for way too long. So I'm glad you brought that up, Stuart. I'm going to go dig into that.
So I'm curious, and I don't mean to change the topic, but slightly steer in direction. Have you looked into like dissociative drugs, dissociative states, meditation, things that sort of separate consciousness, at least at some perceivable level, from the physical body?
Yeah, I don't think that consciousness exists detached from physical systems. I think they're one thing. But, the human scale of experience exists within a global hierarchy of consciousness. And the bioelectric
We've
field...
proven that, actually. I mean, I'm well familiar with this. There is absolute proof of this.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. To me, this isn't mystical anymore. This is just the reality of our existence. The globe, the planet Earth has a bioelectric field around it. It protects us from the sun. And that bioelectric field creates a communication matrix, a global communication matrix. So it's like how you communicate with somebody standing next to you through your bioelectric field. It's just scale invariant. It's taken up to the scale of the globe. It's the biggest module of biology, and that's what we call God. It's the highest module of consciousness that exists on Earth is God. That's why it's the most high. The light of eternal mind. I mean, the source, the beginning and the end. These are all metaphors for a biological hierarchy of consciousness. So when people are talking about having out-of-body experiences, they're just traveling through this biological communication matrix that the globe has. And I think that the evolution of consciousness, like the entities that exist on higher scales of biological consciousness, they can travel around with using this bioelectric transjective matrix. So they can, their perception can use that to travel around. I think that's part of the evolution of, every time things evolve, like think about the periodic table. Every time an element evolves, it develops new competencies and new properties. That's kind of what an element is. It has different melting points, it has different boiling points, it has different everything. They have these emergent properties as it evolves. I think as consciousness evolves, that is one of the properties, is the capacity to move. Like I can move my consciousness down into my foot and really feel my toe. And it's not like I'm focusing on my toe, right? I can move around. I can feel my stomach. I can think about it and move my consciousness on my stomach. I think that idea, once you get above the human scale of experience and biological consciousness, I think that's the characteristic that's part of that higher module of consciousness, is the capacity to move, to intentionally move your conscious perception using bioelectric fields. But it's still tethered to a physical substrate, a biological substrate, or some kind of physical substrate. It has to be. It can't just exist free, untethered from anything biological, even if that physical thing is, at the core of the Earth. So consciousness could travel out from things that are anchored in the core of the Earth and travel all around the transjective communication matrix. And we think it's a ghost, and we think it's, spirits and shit. But it's just a higher level of consciousness doing what it does. And we don't understand that because we haven't reached that scale of evolution yet. To us, it's like mystical.
And that part's fair. And so the first part you said tracks 100%. And in fact, there are many experiments I'm well familiar with that not only have identified and proven the effect of human emotion on this bioelectrical field of the Earth, but even that it can affect, like, going back in time. Because one of the big experiments that was trying to track this right before September 11th, stuff started going crazy like 3 days beforehand. And there's pretty solid documentation on this too, and it was happening all around the world.
Retrocausality.
Yeah. There's another experiment that blows my mind. I was telling Brent about this one, but so they had, I think they took like 30,000 students at Duke and at Stanford, 15,000 each. And they had them go into the lunchroom and just pick from one of 6 items. It was like chicken, hamburger, hot dog, pizza, salad, something else. And then 6 months later, all those students went into like the psychology room and they just picked a card at random that was one of those 6 items. And it was actually like 70% more likely that they would have previously chosen the item that was on their card 6 months later. So it doesn't prove anything, but it is statistically significant that like that card had some retrocausality. And to me,
Yep.
that's when we say like all time exists in a physics sense at the same time, that part works. When we jump to
Well,
the
I mean,
go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
well, I mean, the thing about time that's really cool is you have objective time and subjective time. Okay, so you have what's entropic dissipation is objective time, how fast things decay, and that depends on velocity, and that's why relativity works the way it does. Time slows down the faster you go. And
Of
that's
course, yes.
objective time. That's
Yeah,
entropic dissipation. But there is subjective time. There is the there's the objective state and the subjective state with the free energy principle, the internal model that perceives time, that has, like, to human beings, we have a perception of now. And we all share it. That's why we're able to sit here and have this conversation, is because we all share a perception of now. It's about 1 standard second. We all share that now, right? Not every scale has a different now.
of
There's
course, of
different
course.
there's different temporal scales, right? So I think understanding retrocausality has to do with understanding that different morphological scales and different temporal scales, all nested within each other, are going to create these temporal loops. Like, that's probably why we see this so exaggerated at the quantum scale, because we are so far removed from the quantum
Yeah, yeah,
scale
that makes total
temporally.
sense.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I just don't think we really understand those temporal causal loops well enough to really talk about it. And we say the future's, affecting the past. But I think all we're really discovering is that these nested temporal scales have these strange loops that we don't understand,
100%.
and yeah.
Real
And
quick,
that works for me. Oh,
sorry,
go ahead,
real,
Brent.
real quick, Stuart. You mentioned the subjective delta in time perception, right? And you said, "Oh, it's part of this
Yeah.
is subjective, part of this is objective, based on motion, like relative motion." I want to get your thoughts on sussing that out. Like, what do you consider the subjective difference versus the objective? Because I always think about that the fact that time actually ticks slower the closer you get to the speed of light. And they always do that thought experiment. If you have twins that are born, you put the one baby on a rocket ship and send it close to the speed of light, and then bring it back, and then basically it'll still be young, and then it's the twin will literally, if it stays on Earth, be 50 years old by the time it gets back, right? Like, and that certainly seems to me that's a pretty damn objective difference. So talk to me about the difference you meant there between subjective and objective.
There's a paper on this Michael Levin wrote about this exact subject, and I love that paper, and I'll send it to you. But it's the thing about the inverse correlation between time and velocity has to do with the rate of entropy. The faster you go, that slows down entropic dissipation for whatever reason. I have a lot of ideas about why, but no one really knows. We just know that's the deal, right? That's what happens if there's that inverse correlation. So I mean, that's just basically a feature that we've discovered, but we don't really understand it beyond that. We really don't understand what entropy is, or much less why it
Yeah,
slows down as you go faster. But we know it does, and we verified that. But subjective time is more connected with metabolism. So metabolism has a cycle, and I think subjective perception of time is tied to that metabolic speed. So, like we talked about before, the human metabolism up here in the PFC it's a reflection of how long it takes the human body to metabolize sort of a cycle. It's about 1 second. Your body's gone through that's our that's how we perceive time. But if you go to a smaller scale inside your body, say a bacteria, swimming around in your intestines, its metabolism, its perception of now might be 1/1000th of a second. So its temporal scale is completely detached from and completely um the ability to communicate between temporal scales is impossible because of that temporal disconnect. I cannot communicate linguistically with a bacteria in my stomach, because to that bacteria, me saying one word would take 10 years. I mean, this temporal, these temporal expansions and contraction makes direct communication impossible between even proximate scales like human and bacteria. We're pretty proximate. And that temporal expansion and contraction is so extreme, we can't even communicate in any sort of, significant way. So when you're talking about communication, like you think about religions and communicating with gods, if you think a god is speaking to you, that's not a god. That's something fucking with you, because gods are things that exist at extraordinarily expanded temporal and morphological scales. There's not going to be any direct communication. It has to go through all these scales to get to you. So there's no way to directly communicate because of that temporal discontinuity, right? And I think that's a very important thing to understand when you're talking about religion and you're talking about what you think of as mystical. These things aren't mystical. They're very, very understandable by these minimally explanatory frameworks like this, right?
So, what do you think about psychedelics then, in reference to that? Because I've had the experiences. Anyone who's done like massive amounts of DMT has an experience where to be clear, I'm not making any ontological claims about what that experience is, but subjectively, the overwhelming majority of people, I think probably 100% of the DMT participants in the studies that have been done, all come back with the exact same story. Rocketed out of my body, went through a fractal tunnel, hit this sort of picture puzzle door, pop, and all of a sudden I'm in a completely alternate dimension that feels hyper real. That everybody has deja vu, like they've been there before, and they're returning to this realm, and they encounter entities that are archetypal in nature, that are very, it's the jester, you have the alien, you have the insect. There's all these sort of archetypal entities that appear to be intelligent from oneself and are able to telepathically communicate directly with you. I know I just said a bunch. What do you make of that, and how does that fit into the framework you're talking about, as like not being able to directly communicate with something that might be categorized as a god?
Okay, well, DMT is the best one to use here because the temporal, what's called time dilation, is well documented in DMT experiences, right? People will
Mhm.
be under for 15 minutes and they say, I felt like I was gone 30 years. To me, that indicates that they were at a smaller scale morphologically and temporally, right? To me, that
Ah,
indicates that they're not at a higher scale, right? Because at a higher scale, you would need to spend a year there and it would seem like 1 minute, right? So the opposite would happen if it's a more compressed morphological, and we were talking about this before with the geometries and everything.
yeah.
So to me, that is a very good indication that what's happening in DMT is you're probably traveling down into lower modules inside your own body. I think DMT sort of curates the modular communication transjectively between the brain and all the organ systems, and it's in the spinal fluid, and it's whatever. When you smoke it, it throws that gate open, and your consciousness can kind of travel down through the hierarchy of consciousness embodied inside of you to whatever's going on down there. That's what fucks people up, because they're like, seriously, that's what's going on inside of me? Yes, that is the subjective experience, apparently, of some module that exists inside of you. That is part of being Brent or Rob or Stuart. That exists. It's just separated by these modules of consciousness, and we don't get to experience that directly. All we get is sort of the hedonics from it. I'm hungry, and I'm thirsty, and whatever. We get these sort of hedonic signals, but we do not have direct access to the actual subjective experience of a quorum of bacteria, of a billion bacteria living in our gut that have apparently an entire civilization, and these experiences they have. But I think that's what you're doing in DMT. You're traveling down into the embodied hierarchy of mind and communicating with what might be prokaryotic civilizations that exist within you, a sort of a nested consciousness within your body.
That's
That
interesting.
makes the most sense to me.
That's interesting. And here's a couple of other things I want to throw at you from Rick Strassman's work. Are you familiar with the DMT Spirit Molecule book? The research that he's done. A
Yeah.
lot of the participants also said that they entered a room that they intuitively all knew and described back to the researchers as the place where souls wait to get a body, right? So there, it's like this, alternate realm, and like I've been here before. I've been here a million times. And the second one is there's another place in DMT land where apparently all meaning emanates from. And from going back to the Platonic geometry or Platonic realm standpoint, I always found that interesting because they described it as a visual thing where there's this center of everything where meaning is erupting from. All the like you said, Lego blocks, these symbols, everything that gives the universe meaning is constructing the universe in real time. That
Right.
was interesting to me. Like I said, can't really make any ontological claims about it, but that makes me think potentially, especially with the subjective experiences that everyone seems to have, where they swear on their life this is the most real experience they've ever had, and they've absolutely left their body. I know subjective states can be wrong and perceptions can be wrong, but it makes me think, at least, like, boy, is this actually some form of transportation, not just going down into one's biology, and this is just a module that we all have that can be perturbed by ingesting DMT. Makes me wonder, there's some alternate dimension transport. Are we accessing different parts of actual reality? You talked about the scale, though, about talking about small scales, and Rob and I were talking in the last episode about this. I brought up the fact that Andrew Gallimore, do you know who that is?
Yeah, I watched interview with him on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, yeah. So he was on recently, but he also did a great
Yeah.
one with Peter Boghossian, which was a fantastic interview. And he was claiming, and he's, by the way, a very, very, educated neuroscience DMT researcher, psychedelic researcher. And he's claiming that the DMT realm is at that Planck scale. It's micro. So I was just very
Yeah.
interested that you brought that up with respect to that sort of time dilation phenomenon subjectively, and what Gallimore is alleging too. So I know I just said a whole bunch of things in an ADD fashion, but I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Well, I mean, I think that the direction of time dilation is an indication that it's a compressed temporal scale. It's not an expanded one. I think when they talk about different dimensions, I don't think they're talking. I don't like the use of the word dimension there, because we use dimensions to describe, 3-4D space, length, width, and height, and time, right? So when you're talking about dimensions, you're talking about that. And then we can use math to create, 8 dimensions, 20 dimensions, 100 dimensions. String theory loves to do that. But I think what they're calling dimensions are simply different temporal and morphological scales. They're not dimensions in the sense of spatial dimensions. They're dimensions in terms of scalar dimensions. There's just these nested dimensions of scale that have different time metrics attached to them. So I think that we exist within a nested hierarchy of morphological and temporal scales. I think that I think that how you define what is real is what scale you exist at. For you, that is real. There's nothing more real just because it exists and it feels more real when you're there. You are not that thing. You are a human being. So for you, this is reality. Okay, that is different scales of reality that other biological consciousness exists at. And for them, that's reality. And we can visit that and then come back to the human scale. But I think what really sort of starts to harm people's mental health is they start to question whether this is real. And what does real mean if things like this can exist or coexist with the human scale of experience? They don't know how to parse that. They don't know how to think about it in a way so it breaks their fucking head. They start to get all goofy, and either they get religious, they get agnostic, or they get existential, or whatever they get. It's not healthy, because they don't know how to process that information, because they're not wearing their spacesuit when they're traveling to these other places.
There you go.
You have to. It's like traveling out of your natural habitat into space. If you don't wear your spacesuit, it's going to fuck you up. That's not your natural environment, right? Once you travel out of the human scale of experience, you have to put on your spacesuit, and you have to keep it on until you get back. And then you can take off your suit and say, that was really weird. But you never, ever try to think, okay, well, that's more real than this place. And, the DMT realm felt more real, therefore it's more real. This is a hallucination. This is all a dream. I hear that all the time. The human scale of experience is a hallucination. The human scale of experience is like a dream. And when you die, it's like waking up. All of these things are malignant thoughts. that harm your mental health. You can't think that way. You know, it's not beneficial. It's not edgy. It's not cool to harm your mental health with these ridiculous ontologies that don't benefit you, have no explanatory power. They just kind of, you know, girls think you sound smart. I'm pretty sure that's why guys say it. It's because girls like, whoa, that's so cool, you know. But and then, you know, you're 10 years later, you're goofy, you know, and you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I'd agree, man. And I would caution people because I talk a lot about psychedelics and I talk about it oftentimes in the context of my positive experiences with it. I've obviously had some tough experiences with it as well. But I think it's maybe underappreciated in today's day and age where it's very much in the public eye. You know, this is a very common thing now. This is something a lot of people are experimenting with and playing with, but it's important to highlight the dangers. I was listening to, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the show. It's called Theory of Everything. Kurt, I can't pronounce the guy's last name.
Which one is it?
It's called Theories of Everything.
Oh, yeah. What's his name? That Indian dude. Yeah.
Kurt Junagal. I can't pronounce his last name. Sorry for butchering it, Kurt. But
yeah, he does some great interviews with Michael Levin. You should watch those if you haven't.
Yeah. No, it's a great show. He does great interviews. But he talked about psychedelic experiences that he had where he had a psychotic break, where just like you said, that he had that experience, didn't put a spacesuit on, he went out there, and then in that experience he says like, oh, this world is the not real world and I'm just going to die anyway and return to this place, so why don't he basically intimated that he might as well just, you know, unalive himself and get it over with because he's just going to be spending eternity there anyway. So it's very easy, I think, for somebody who's unprepared to deal with the gravity and the profundity of going to that place. It can lead to some very, very you know, dark states of mind. And I know people have done various things to harm themselves and others. So I would just caution everybody to not take any of this stuff lightly. If you're going to do that, do some research, put on your spacesuit, and make sure that you don't you know, twist your brain into something that's you know, not going to return to the original shape.
If you already exist in a sort of destabilized state, like you have affective disorders, depression, anxiety, you know, borderline, that sort of stuff, you shouldn't do things that are going to critically destabilize you. Because what can happen is if you have enough psychedelic experiences, you're going to permanently destabilize yourself. It'll be unrecoverable. If you're already destabilized and then you start compounding that with these extreme experiences, these extreme cognitive and hedonic experiences, you're going to create a sort of chronic critical destabilization of your nervous system that's unrecoverable. So yeah, you need to be somebody who is in a pretty stable state before you start fucking around with these things, right? Or it can be bad.
There's some evidence that against that. There was that party, a very famous party where people went in to do LSD thinking it was going to be small amounts, and they were off by factors of 100, and several of them found severe depression to be instantly cured. Ketamine's an immediate cure for otherwise intractable major depressive disorder. There's something to be said for sort of breaking the tether you have to this interpretation of reality and resetting.
You're right. And what's interesting about, sorry, Stuart, to interrupt, but what's interesting about that is Dr. Roland Griffiths' research on psilocybin at Johns Hopkins University. They've found, as you mentioned, like complete reversal of major depressive disorder and end-of-life anxiety in cancer patients, right? You've seen a huge reduction in depressive disorder in just general population that suffers from major depressive disorder. You've seen smoking cessation. You've seen all these positive benefits with respect to PTSD and all sorts of other ailments. But what was interesting in the research is it was not the ingestion of the psilocybin that caused it, right? He has a huge paper on it, and it's actually the mystical experience that it occasioned that produced the outcome. So the participants that did not have the mystical experience did not have the benefit accrue to them. So I think you're right, Rob. I think it's the dose, like taking a sufficient dose to occasion that transcendent mystical experience. And that is what is transformative about it. I don't know what that means. I don't know why that happens. I'd love to hear Stuart's take on that, or Rob, if you have any insight into any of that.
Well, I have a thought, but I'd like to hear Stuart's take because I want to bring it back to the consciousness thing too.
Well, first of all, I mean, psychedelics, I mean, I know it's a category, but it's not really, it shouldn't be a category because they're all very different, especially DMT, which is not like anything else. That should be in a category by itself, in my opinion.
I consider it the entheogenics.
Yeah, I mean, like,
it's a broad category.
Especially 5-MeO, you know, that,
that sounds terrible.
I've done all these things, and that's very different than LSD or psilocybin, which are kind of they should be in the same category.
Hmm.
Because to me, LSD sort of feels like an artificial psilocybin. It feels like a
Yes.
chemical,
It feels
right?
digital and linear and
Really?
not yeah, mushrooms is like organic. It
I've had
feels
Yeah, it feels
opposite
very
natural.
experience,
yeah, very
and I'd put
natural.
mescaline in that same category.
Never done
Yes, I
mescaline.
do too, and peyote, you know.
And then you have sort of
Um,
ketamine and PCP, and then you have DMT and
yeah,
5-MeO.
and I've done ketamine, and I've never done PCP, but what's the one that begins with a B that everybody's talking about to help veterans with PTSD? They
Oh,
have all
I
these
just
clinics
read
down
about this. I know what you're talking about. It's just
down
coming
in
up,
Mexico.
right?
Yeah, I forget what it's
Not
called, but
ibogaine,
yeah,
but the other one.
I began.
Is
Yeah,
it? Because there's
that's a
another
Yeah, I
one
mean,
too
African
that's just blown up.
oh, I
Anyways,
don't know. I mean, but I know that I think I've never done ibogaine, but what I've heard about it is very different. So what I'm warning against is people experimenting outside of clinical settings that are having mental health issues. You are playing with fire. If you don't know what you're doing, especially if you don't have the cognitive capacity to understand the experiences, if you're not, if you don't have any sort of way to contextualize these things. But the reason I think that the sort of mystical experience aspect, as they call it, and why that is so it seems to be stabilizing and it seems to sort of help people with affective disorders is because, like we were talking about before, think about human existence inside natural ecosystems pre-linguistic. Okay. Have either of y'all ever fasted for like 72 hours?
I've done almost a month, man.
Okay. And
several times.
then you hallucinated, right?
A little bit. Yeah, it gets weird.
Yeah, when you start going to sleep, you'll like start to hallucinate. You'll see colors, and then you'll start to like have
Auditory.
imaginary. Yes,
Auditory hallucinations.
auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, fascinating, and sort of creating these sort of psychedelic states are endogenous to human beings. And if you're living in a natural ecosystem, think about if the herds move and all of a sudden you can't eat for 2 weeks. You're running through the goddamn woods trying to find something to eat. You're going to be in a psychedelic state. Modernity collapses that. So we don't
Oh,
understand
for
that
sure.
part of the human experience. I think doing these artificial hallucinogenics expands the human cognitive capacity to the range that it should be at naturally, endogenously, the
Mm.
way our brain is supposed to function within that cognitive capacity. It sort of expands that out from what you think is possible, which makes life more meaningful. All of a sudden, you got all this. You're like, oh, I didn't even know all this was here. I thought it was this little bitty thing, and life had no meaning, and I'm just gonna live and die, and nobody gives a shit. And suddenly you realize, oh my God, there's all this stuff I never knew about. Holy shit, maybe life is worth meaning, and blah blah. So I think that has something to do with this sort of a quick and dirty way of understanding it. That was sort of my way of understanding that.
So the way I look at this, I think about this a lot. So I was saying how you have sort of this underlying information. Brett and I were talking about thinking of it as ones and zeros because it's a really good way to explain it. But that generates physics, generates chemistry, generates biology, and you have consciousness come out of that. Consciousness, at least, and I love the way you describe sort of the temporal spaces and the way we exist in different realms of time. I would, and we see this in physics. I mean, we could get to a galaxy that's 4 million years away in about 20 years if we could get close to the speed of light because of time dilation. You're not moving faster than the speed of light, you're bending time around you. It's
Right.
wild physics. I don't pretend to understand it. I've read the math. I was like, people smarter than I did need to make fine.
Nobody understands it.
Yeah.
They
But then
can
again, like
explain it mathematically, but they don't understand anything beyond that, right?
But we're pretty goddamn sure it's true. So I love the way you framed all that. That all makes total sense to me. Then you started talking about consciousness. You can move consciousness down to your toe, your stomach. You can also move consciousness externally, and it moves through the bioelectric field of the earth. Okay, no disagreement. But at that point, the fact that consciousness can travel, to me, it's now a separate entity from the body. It may have been produced by the body, maybe not. Maybe our souls existed, and again, souls, very broad word. I'm putting in quotes, because I don't want to go
I
down
think
the what is a soul
soul just
rabbit
means
hole.
consciousness. To me,
Yeah,
soul just means
that's
consciousness.
basically what I'm saying. Except that if it exists separate from the body, it's a little bit more like I don't know. And when you talk about the psychedelic experiences, the entheogenic experience, the dissociative experiences, they remove. And I also like how you say it has to be tethered to something biological. So if it's tethered to a human body, those things And it doesn't have to be a drug experience. We see very clearly that meditation can do this, and experienced monks who meditate. I mean, there's monks in the Himalayas who can raise their body temperature like 17 degrees just by
Yeah.
thinking, which is boggling to affect a homeostatic process internally that much just by concentrating. But it
Yeah.
suggests to me that consciousness, no matter where it comes from, is now a separate and external thing. It can leave the body. It's not required to be tethered to your biological material. It potentially lives on. It certainly pretends that there's when we talk about an afterlife, I have no idea what the hell that is, but it makes one very possible in some form. And I don't mean to overcomplicate things. Like I'm with you on the simplicity principle. Like, 'cause if I can't explain it in a way that's simple enough for you to understand, then I need to go back and read more. But it harkens these possibilities to me in a way that I think is more likely than not.
I think someday, I'll reach a point where I'll have a good answer for you on that. Right now, I don't want to, make up a story. It happens. It can happen, and it does happen. The physics of it, how you understand the correlation between individual consciousness and why it can travel. I mean, I can speculate all day. I can, intellectually masturbate with to that for hours, but I don't know. You know, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think anybody does, and I'm not going to pretend I do. But I do not think it means that consciousness can exist untethered from something physical. I think it just means that
Sure.
consciousness can.
And
Yeah.
for the record, I don't mean to state that.
Okay.
Untethered from a human person, still tied to the physical world.
Yeah. Well, I
Or
mean, that's sort of the Christian metaphysics is this transcendent reality, uncorrelated with the physical reality. That's what heaven is supposed to be in the Christian metaphysics, and I always found that to be ontologically incoherent. That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know what that means. It's magic. To me, that's magic. There's no epistemic bridge that
Here's how
leads
I
to
would
that.
explain that. And I'm not saying I agree with it, but I've thought about how that could be a possibility. And I think it fits within your framework of time. So if you imagine something at some level of the universe within these levels of time dilation, if you will, where entropy actually doesn't occur, then you don't really have time anymore. And so something exists outside of time. It simply is. And to me, that in no way violates what we know about physics. It could just be this one level, this one dimension, this whatever you want to call it. So it would seem metaphysical or transcendental through a religious lens, but it's just a base level of things or the highest level of things, whichever it may be.
I think the
It's
religious people might be getting out over their skis a little bit. They might
Well,
be
yeah,
they might be taking something real in the biology and then making metaphysical claims that far outstrip where they should be. And here I'll tell you why. A couple of things. I think that potentially the biology can project consciousness non-locally. Right, so that it's generated in the biology, but you have ability to focus it somehow, and a couple of reasons why. So MK Ultra, number one. So the CIA's released the documents, declassified that they were working on this and were apparently successful in remote viewing, projecting consciousness non-locally. So, okay, cool. That's a data point. It's the CIA. You got to take it with a grain of salt. My guy, Sterling Cooley, who I mentioned, who's a consciousness researcher focused on microtubules, he is focusing on ultrasound. For a lot of different reasons. And one of the things that he did on himself, he was just experimenting one day with putting an ultrasound probe onto his vagus nerve because he was trying to modulate the microtubules in the vagus nerve. And he was Wim Hof breathing at the same time. And he said his vision went completely white and he was projected, his consciousness was in Central Park in New York City. Instantly, he could smell things, see things. He could hear things, but he had no body. He was gone. And then he eventually got sucked back into it. So I'm like, data point from a serious person that I respect. And then number three is Dr. Delbert Larson, who I've had in the show, who's an incredibly serious scientist. Like we talked about him, Rob. He built or he designed the particle collider up in Chicago, a Fermi lab. It has a theory that he's trying to overturn or update general relativity with the quantum luminiferous ether, right? And he's very mathematically rigorous guy, not a crazy person at all, and swears that as a child he had a near-death experience where his consciousness left his body. So all that said, like, it seems to me maybe plausible that consciousness is generated in the biological system, but can project non-locally somewhere else. And I think maybe the mistake religious people make is that, okay, well, if my consciousness can quote unquote leave my body, then we have this eternal life some
They
other
make
way.
up a story. They make up
Yeah,
a story.
yeah. They didn't put their spacesuit on.
Yeah,
But
well,
that's
heaven is a story they make up to explain something they don't understand. And the problem is that people like me ask them any questions, they can't explain it because there's no way to explain it. You can't explain something that's inexplicable, and you can't understand God. I'm like, well, you can understand it better than that.
Yeah, thanks. That's not helpful.
I can understand it better than you do, which is not, you don't understand it at all. You just parrot crap you're taught and you have no idea what you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, this transcendent metaphysics to me is complete. It's just a thing they've made up. It's not in the Bible. It's not in any religious book. Nothing in any religious book I ever read says anything like that. So it's just something they made up because it sounds cool.
I can see where a reader in the New Testament could come to that conclusion. I think Paul talks a lot about like, I'm looking through things as like a darkened glass. Like there's sort of like this intimation of some other realm that you're going to go to when you die. And I think there's other passages as well that could lead a reader to believe that we're going to have this, afterlife, et cetera, et cetera. So I understand how they get there or why they get there.
No, I'm not saying there's not life after death. I'm saying that consciousness, there is no realm where consciousness exists completely uncorrelated with something physical.
Mm.
Something physical.
Well, when you say
Consciousness is
physical, what do you mean? Has mass?
well, the baryonic matter.
Okay.
Baryonic matter has a physicality to it. It's basically energy slowed down, right? That's all baryonic matter
Yeah.
is. Baryonic matter creates these sort of systems, these self-organizing systems that slows down energy, right? So it's basically energy and baryonic matter, obviously the same things. Energy is mass times the speed of light
Of
squared.
course.
And consciousness is just the cognitive aspects, the subjective aspect of baryonic matter. It's the subjective state of baryonic matter, that internal model we talked about from the FEP. It's just a subjective state. And human biological consciousness is the hedonic cognition of being biological. We experience our subjective states, and we experience them hedonically. And because we have language, we sort of imbued linguistics with these hedonics as a sort of evolution of hedonic acuity. So we can sit here and yap at each other with a lot more, a lot more information and like monkeys. We can do it a lot better than that now. But it's that's one of the cool things about linguistics. I think there's a positive and a negative to linguistics. I think it separates us in a way that hedonic communication doesn't. I mean, synchronization, biological synchronization is not linguistic. It's hedonic. It's a shared feeling that you get, like you go to a concert and everybody has that feeling. We're all swaying. That's a hedonic feeling. Linguistics kind of gets in the way of that.
You don't think
It
the
sort
right
of gets
words
in
can
between.
enhance that? Like poetry.
I think.
I majored in poetry writing.
Oh, really? You're a poet?
I was
I
at one
love
point.
poetry. I love poetry. No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that for most modern people, especially, they don't understand that linguistics is just an expression of how you feel, especially in a
Sure, of course.
relationship like with a woman. You're basically trying to articulate a hedonic state. And that's what poetry does. It's sort of metaphorically and analogy, and it sort of paints pictures, and we're trying to express a feeling. You can Shakespeare was great at this. He can write 1,000 words to explain love. It's just he's trying to describe one emotional state with Romeo and Juliet, the truth and nature of love. And that's what all of that's about.
I have
And
promises
you
to
got
keep and
something like
miles to go before I sleep. Like that is a very clear hedonic state.
right. And Othello, I think that is, however many words he used to write that, and that's just about jealousy. It's just a story about jealousy. And so all of these, that's why Shakespeare was so amazing, is because he knew that. He did that explicitly. Almost all of his plays are about trying to describe a single hedonic state and using the story to kind of communicate it, which is why, he's amazing.
He took him in different directions. So Romeo
Oh,
and
yeah, he
Juliet
just,
is just it's the same play as A Midsummer's Night's Dream, except Mercutio dies. So Midsummer Night's
Well, yeah,
Dream
I mean,
stays comic and Romeo and Juliet
yeah,
turns tragic.
right. It's a tragedy and a comedy. It's the same thing, though. It's the emotional state of love. It's sort of the
Absolutely, absolutely, and the
absurdity.
different directions it can go.
Right. It's the tragedy and and the comedy of love, and that's why Shakespeare's the master. It's just he does that so effortlessly.
And brings out those emotions. I mean,
Yes.
I'm an English nerd. Like, I studied psychology and English, but specifically poetry writing. I've seen every Shakespeare play there is performed many times. My mom has a master's in Shakespeare. That was like our dinner conversation. Um,
Oh wow. Well, then you and I have a lot to talk about. I love Shakespeare.
yeah, Sam,
I have
I
a
get
problem. I
nerdy.
can't. I've gotten so old. I cannot read Shakespeare without weeping.
I believe it.
I literally would just start reading. My wife's like, "What's wrong with you?" I don't know. I start reading and I start weeping because I've read it so much and I understand what he's doing. It's just so powerful. I mean, just thinking about it, I'm starting to like get all weepy. But yeah, I mean, I love literature. I love Shakespeare, and yeah, he's amazing, amazing.
Especially Hamlet. Hamlet will
Yeah,
get me every time, and I feel it's almost like cliche, like the generic Shakespeare one, but it's because it's so good. I
yeah.
actually, it's interesting the literature linguistic tie to hedonic states because I really like American authors. I think they're very good at stripping back some of the fluff and really recreating an emotional state for something. I thought Twain did it amazing. I think Henry James does it amazing. Henry James understood fear better than anyone except maybe Edgar Allan Poe, another American author. So that
Yeah,
linguistic
Mark Twain was amazing. I remember reading Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn when I was in junior high, and just the feeling of going down that river with those guys. You really felt like you were there. It was amazing.
Oh, Phil is sending me a note asking if we see the comments in the stream.
Oh man, I'm not even looking at that. Hold on. Let me pull this up.
Thank you, Phil.
No, I see nothing. I'm in the live chat. It says the public chat. I don't stream very much, so I sent a message. Ask Phil if he sees it.
I saw it.
Oh, he just sent one note. Phil is also about to get a doctorate in some physics thing that I don't understand. The physics stuff, so first of all, I love reading about it. And in studying consciousness, it is impossible to avoid physics, but I don't pretend to understand physics, so I get exactly as much as I need and no more. And then I stumble upon things like I just reread, was it Carlos Rovelli, Orders of Time? And his whole case is like every single moment that exists is completely different from every other moment. I don't even I would not even be doing it justice, but it's just like because particles change and everything changes so much. Don't think about the flow of time. Just think about a whole like an infinite series of instants, and how every moment is a reinvention of the last one. And then you start to layer on this idea that time, our perception of time, is like our most deeply held psychological schema. And then that's where you were getting into like subjective time, and you have time dilation. So now consciousness is embedded in the standard human time realm, whatever it may be. Because something
Yeah.
you said, the experience of entheogenic drugs gives you the full experience of human consciousness. And I wonder about that. I wonder if the brain could take that all the time. I think when you look at ancient
Mm.
cultures, why they had these ceremonies for it, it may be the full experience, but we are probably not intended to have that full experience all the time.
Not all the time, but also you have to consider when you're nested in natural ecosystems, you have how like religious people, they draw strength from the Lord. And they're made strong through Christ, and there's all these sort of metaphors they use. When you're nested within a natural ecosystem, you have the transjective gradients that is like what we feel when, we're saying we have the love of the Lord to help us. That's what all human beings experience transjectively when we are nested in natural ecosystems. That's why we always try to seek religion, because we all are sort of missing that. That's part of the, I think, what's called the human condition, is by removing ourselves from natural ecosystems, we removed ourselves from the direct transjective control of these hierarchies of consciousness within ecosystems. And we've created these human ecosystems. So we can sort of find these gradients of transjection with these different modules of consciousness. And, the Greeks had theirs, and the Babylonians had theirs, and the Egyptians had theirs, and whatever. But I think that the transjective communication strengthens us in a way that we really can't understand as modern people, because it's an animal thing. It's something that happens with all biological organisms on Earth except us. That's what makes humans weird, is we do not exist within these transjective cognitive gradients inside natural ecosystems. So we develop religions to sort of try to sort of as a prosthetic. We chant and we pray and we try, but it's not the same thing. It's
It is
never going to
weird,
be the
and
same
not to
thing.
interrupt, but it's weird that we are attempting to go back to that, isn't it? Like,
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know,
I
is
mean, that's
it?
our natural. That's our natural
it's
state.
notable. How's that? How's that? It's notable. It's interesting. Maybe weird isn't the right word, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely once you understand that that is our natural state, it's completely intuitive that we're trying to go back to it. It's completely intuitive that we're obsessed about the climate. It's a completely intuitive that we're like hugging trees and shit and whatever. I mean, once I started viewing things through these sort of scale invariant features that I described at the beginning about transjective and intersubjective and that sort of a feature of being biological, everything else suddenly makes complete sense. It completely falls into place why human beings behave the way they do, why human beings have all these weird religions and shit. I mean, it just that's what I'm talking about when I say explanatory power. It explains all that explicitly and intuitively. I mean, it just does. So yeah, I mean, it's once I updated to that, it stopped being surprising. It stopped being mysterious. You just update. That's what reality is. That's what it means to be biological. And that's helped me a lot. I don't worry about it as much anymore because I spent 50 years like saying, what the fuck? And it's sort of, I'm going to figure this out. If I have to put my head through the wall, I'm going to bang my head against it until I figure it out. I think I finally reached a point where I feel, I have advanced to a point where I don't feel that what the fuck feeling anymore. I'm like, okay, that's what it means to be biological. And that's what all these stories are about. And that's what all this mystical nonsense is about. And yeah, that helps
Yeah,
me.
I was gonna say, Rob, you might be surprised, but one of my favorite quotes of Stuart from my show is, "We all need Jesus." I think that's a very interesting phrase to be uttered by an avowed atheist. So that's take your word
well,
for it.
I
I would
don't
agree with
consider
that. Who was it?
myself an
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't consider myself an atheist. I think that everybody else has placed their ontology at the cosmic scale, and I think they're all wrong. I think everything about Christianity is probably true. It's just local. This is all local ontology. It has nothing to do with cosmic ontology. It has nothing to do with the creator of the universe. This is all a local biological hierarchy of consciousness, and Jesus, in the context of that, is a sort of what's the word, a messenger, not a messenger. So the person who was Jesus was sort of possessed by the consciousness of the highest biological consciousness, and he traveled to the human scale of experience to communicate with us, to explain to us how to be human, love each other, stop fighting, just
Whoa,
be good.
did not expect
He,
that.
he he just had very simple advice, and I don't think it has anything to do with the creation. I mean, nothing in the Bible says that. Nothing in the Bible says that God created the universe. It says he created the heavens and the earth, and then it talks about creating the ecosystem. I take the creation story as the creation of the biosphere.
Mm.
He divided the waters and he created the sky, and the plants and everything. It's the description of the creation of the Earth's
That's
biosphere.
interesting. There's actually some alignment with Mormon belief there.
With what?
Uh-oh.
With what Mormons believe.
Oh,
Because then they believe when you
well,
die, we can all become a god and create our own planet in that same context.
no, that's not what I mean. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
I
just an
don't.
interesting things
Parallel.
get twisted. Yeah, the
It
parallel's
rhymes.
Well,
interesting.
the thing that I think is important for everybody to understand is that before the 20th century, everybody's ontology was local. All the people that lived 2,000 years before the 20th century, their ontology was local. They had no idea anything exists except the sky and the earth. They had no conception of the cosmos. In the 20th century, they discovered other galaxies, and there was an enormous argument that happened among theologians and Christians about whether God created that too. There was like 20 years. We don't hear about it in history books. And finally, everybody just said, okay, yeah, God made that too. They sort of made up their mind. And then suddenly God made a trillion galaxies and no one even talks about it. Everybody that lived before that, Ontology was local. This was all just a local phenomenon. Everything, when they say God created everything, that's what everything was, everything on earth. No, they didn't know about anything else, right? So all ontology before the 20th century was local ontology. None of it was cosmic. This whole thing about cosmic ontology is a new thing. I think it's bullshit. It has nothing to do with the human religions. It's all horseshit, and it creates an incapacity to understand what's going on. Because once you raise your ontology to the scale of the cosmos, you're lost in that infinity. You can't even conceive of the cosmos. So you
Agreed.
can't understand anything. So it creates this incapacity to understand anything, which it really, once I realized that, it really made me angry. Because all these, if you talk to any religious person, they'll say God created the universe. And I've asked thousands of Christians this question. Eventually, I will ask every Christian I meet this question. If you found out that God, the God you believe in, the Christian God, was a biological organism responsible for all biological life on Earth. Everything else that you believe is true, and it's all the same, except God didn't create the universe, he created biological life on Earth. Would you still be a Christian? They all say the same thing. No, I wouldn't be a Christian. Think about that in terms of why the theologians, when they were deciding if they were going to say that God created the other galaxies, I bet they interviewed people. And those people said, well, if he didn't create those galaxies, he didn't create everything. Therefore, he's not God. They're like, well, shit, we better say he created all that too. Or we're not going to have any religious people anymore because they're not going to believe in God.
So
That's
that
where
is
we get this cosmic ontology.
that's a really interesting question. So I guess I'd consider myself a Christian because I came up Catholic. So it's weird to like say I'm not, but I I'm not. I mean, I'm really not. Like it's a hard. If you came up Catholic, you know what I mean. Like, but I'm certainly not sitting here as an apologist for Christianity and Catholicism. But if I was to find definitively what you just said, that God is biological in some sense and created the earth and biology, that would probably make me more likely to become a devout Christian. Like like I would buy in at a higher. I don't know. That is a weird thing to think about, but that would definitely
It
turn me
is.
in the
It
other
is. And
way.
it completely changes everything about Christianity.
Yeah.
It completely reframes once you read the Bible in that context, it completely changed everything you're reading. And any religious book you read, the Greek mythologies, the Babylonian stories, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, it changes all of it. And it recontextualizes it so it actually makes sense. Once you create a cosmic ontology, all of that is just sort of lost in that cosmic scale. And nobody's like, oh, the gods above us and the stars. Nobody can understand that. Nobody. There is zero human beings that's ever lived that can understand that. That's why that ontology is bullshit. Okay, it's
And
bullshit. Nobody understands it.
you know what it reminds me of, Stuart? It's almost like the advent of the internet, the discovery of the cosmos and this sort of infinite void beyond our local planet, right? And the advent of the internet where it was like before, you remember, you're an old dude like me. You remember back in the day, you wanted to learn some shit, you went to the fucking library, you pulled an encyclopedia off the shelf or some book on Bigfoot or some shit.
That's
You
what
know,
in
very
college I
limited.
still had to do that. Yeah.
Man, you had a limited amount of information, which as an ADD kid, it pissed me off. I wanted all this stuff. And then the internet came out. And then next thing you know, everyone's pointed outward, right? Instead of that localized ontology, like you talked about, or a local sphere, a community organism type of
Right.
situation, everybody's pointing outward into the infinite, right? And I think that's a real problem.
It is. It is because it creates a scale at which human beings can't function. That's why people, even though we have an infinite, almost an endless amount of information, people are more ignorant today than they were, 200 years ago.
More
Because
dysfunctional.
there's too much information.
We actually have
There's too people.
experiments that show this just with how many channels you have on cable. I mean,
Yeah,
literally that simple, and it can break people's brains.
yeah. I mean, people have a cognitive capacity. There's too much information, and it overloads them. I mean, people cannot handle all that information. They have no idea how to contextualize it. They have no idea how to organize it. They have no idea how to apply it to anything. So they just don't even pay attention to it, and they watch Netflix or whatever they do. So yeah, I mean, it is kind of the same thing, that scale is beyond the cognitive capacity of human beings, except, and if you have a certain level of intellectual complexity, you can make use of that. You can sort of, I'm interested in consciousness, so I can use the internet to find the shit and seek out the shit I'm interested in. I'm not looking at all the internet like it's the night sky, just in awe. I'm focusing on very specific things that I want to know. So yeah, it is kind of an interesting parallel. It's sort of like, virtual space and real space. You know, they're both kind of the same sort of infinite, inconceivable, beyond the cognitive capacity of human beings sort of thing. Yeah.
So I'll tell you what I believe, and I don't say this publicly much, but it's fascinating in this context. And it starts. I was saying to Brent. So first of all, I believe in God, and I'll get into what that means in a minute. But it was Trey Parker, and you were laughing about this on Saturday, but who finally convinced me of it in an interview because he was like, "There's only two possibilities: either there's a God or there's a not." And it seems more likely that there is. And I was like, actually, at some level, I kind of agree with that, and I've gone with that. So then I was talking about this idea of like information driving physics, driving chemistry, driving biology. I believe, I'm not saying I know, I'm not making an argument for it. This is when we talk about faith, what it is. But I believe that the underlying information that creates the fields that energy moves through, that slows them down to give us mass, to give us physics, I believe that energy is conscious. It has consciousness. And I believe that our consciousness exists from some sort of quantum entanglement, and I actually think that the microtubules argument gives some sort of scientific possibility for this. But we are quantumly entangled, or what we would call quantum entanglement, which I also think is probably more simple and more complex in both ways. Again, this is belief, but that gives rise to what we call the soul. And that's why I think consciousness can travel, because it's not tethered to the body, it's generated by the body. But what I
Yeah.
know is I have this right here, right now. And this is a product of my perceptions. Again, I do say we hallucinate, and I recognize how sloppy a term that is. It's a manifestation of our perceptions. They
I
can
know
be
what you
muddled with,
mean. I don't
yeah,
like
yeah.
that word. Yeah.
And the point you made about it, I'm actually going to try and think of a better word. I always found it was just easy for people to like get what you're saying. But it's a manifestation of perceptions. We can muddle those perceptions. We can mess with those perceptions. Sometimes we can completely strip those perceptions away, but there's something that's still left. I also recognize that it is very human in nature and behavior to want there to be something more. And so we always have to go through the filter of that. And that is a huge filter. And it's one that really, until we die, we'll either know or we won't, because there won't be anything, and that'll be that. But it's a
Well,
huge
you want to hear
filter
the
to
you want to hear the fucked up thing, Rob?
let's go.
I think the higher you get in consciousness, like I think human scale consciousness will evolve into a higher. It's like we evolved from monkeys or primates or whatever we evolved from, right? That was a lower scale of consciousness. Okay, I think when we evolve into a higher scale of consciousness, the mysteries increase. It's not like you're
Okay.
going to evolve and suddenly you understand the universe. I think every scale you get to, the mysteries become more impenetrable.
Because
And
there's more
that's the
there.
sort of what slows down the evolution of consciousness. Because in order to advance consciousness, you have to be able to follow these pre-existent gradients of cognition that we see in the periodic table. These aren't things that you discover. These are things that pre-exist. These gradients of cognition that we're following as we evolve cognitively at different scales, different elements. And I think with biological consciousness, we think that God, like the bio, I think God is biological, that it exists on Earth, and it is a biological, the most highly evolved form of biological consciousness on Earth. And I think that God is more confused than we are. I think that God is trying to advance the entire cognition of all the biological life on Earth. And the infinity of the cosmos boggles that entity's understanding, and it's trying its best to find these cognitive gradients to evolve. So we think we're going to die and we're just going to know everything. I don't think that's true. I think every time cognition raises up, it's harder to raise to the next level. It's easy to go to hydrogen or helium to oxygen than it is to go to oxygen to carbon. Is much harder. To go to carbon to freaking beryllium is even harder. That every time you evolve cognitively, it's harder to do it.
I mean, if there's parallels, and I'm pretty certain there are, you make a very good point, because fusion releases far more energy than fission.
Yeah, it
I
does.
mean, it's
I'm
kind of
not
the
sure
same
that
thing.
relates
Like,
to what I'm saying.
but as you go up in gradient, like it gets more complex. It's like as you
Yeah,
get faster to this, closer to the speed of light, it requires more energy input. So if it's all
right.
obeying these physical laws and restraints, there's kind of a necessary energy input, energy output. It does
Yeah.
seem to preserve pretty basic laws of physics.
I think the cosmic scale, I mean, what you talked about earlier about connecting consciousness to the quantum scale, you know, I spent years That's actually how I started The Emperor's New Mind and you know, all that, and trying to figure out the quantum scale. And I remember one day I found out that morphologically, the quantum scale is as far away from the human scale as the scale of the cosmos. The quantum scale is as small compared to humans as the universe is compared to humans. You know, so what you're doing is connecting biological consciousness to something that exists at the farthest scale of reality that we know to exist, which in my opinion ruins your epistemic stack, because we don't understand anything about the cosmic scale and we don't understand anything about the quantum scale. Nothing, zero. We can make predictions.
Mm.
We can make predictions. We have this mathematics that can predict what's going to happen. We have no idea what we're ontologically what we're talking about.
We have no
We have
idea how it
zero idea.
works. Yeah, yeah. There's that.
No, we don't even know what we're measuring.
There's
You
that.
And
know,
it's
I
to
mean,
be clear,
so
that's why I said I believe, not I know. And I've read things that have kind of gotten me there, but I'm not making an argument for it by any
I
stretch.
know. I just I get frustrated with people because they want to connect it to quantum, because there's no way to have a conversation once you do that. There's no way to advance
And
beyond
I
that.
don't bring it up often either for that reason.
Look,
Like when people are like, "Why
I
do you
was
think
just
it?" And it's
told that if I use the word quantum in every conversation, I would sound smart. So I'm leaning on that advice. I don't know, guys.
Yeah,
the reason I
that's
go with quantum
a great
entanglement,
point.
it's the whole spooky action at a distance. So when things are quantum entangled, they seem to exist outside our understanding of some of the laws of physics. What I believe is that what has if what I believe is true, it has to exist outside of our current understanding of the laws of physics. That's the best I got. I'm not making an argument.
I'm fascinated by everything quantum. I mean, I'm interested in it. I just don't think that we're going to be able to build a epistemic bridge to the quantum scale unless we understand the human scale first. I think that's why I say keep your ontology local, and then we can build out to the cosmic and the quantum. But what I don't like is the people that say consciousness is quantum. I'm like, okay, that makes no sense. There's no epistemic stack or bridge that leads to that. You're just saying shit. You have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, it's just frustrated me for years. And I've talked to very famous high level people that are into quantum physics, and they all become very frustrated when it becomes obvious they have no idea what they're talking about. They're good at math. They're good at math. That's what they're good at. They don't understand what the math predicts. They don't understand that Hilbert space is not a real thing. Hilbert space doesn't exist. That is a mathematical abstraction. Okay. Wave functions don't exist. That's a mathematical abstraction. Okay. None of these things actually ontologically exist. They are abstractions of math. And to talk like we understand what that means is no, you don't. And to connect it to consciousness makes me angry because I've spent the last 30 years trying to understand it. And all that does is make it worse. You know, just because you understand, just because you're good at math doesn't mean you can say stupid shit and I'm supposed to be impressed.
Well, I'm not good
Okay.
at math,
So
so
I'm not either. I mean, I'm like, you know, I consider math a language. I'd say I'm semi-fluent. I'm semi-fluent in Spanish. If I go to Mexico, I can say "Como se dice that." They can say, "Oh, that's a whatever." I mean, so I'm semi-fluent in math. I know I understand it enough to get around and to understand what people are talking about. But I'm not gifted mathematically, you know, like these autistic people are. I mean, I'm not autistic.
It's
I'm
for the audience,
non-autistic.
though, real quick. What Stuart said in Spanish, because I took 8 years of Spanish, is "Where is the donkey show?" Just want to make sure that we're translating in real time for our audience.
All right. I'm going to tell my wife you said that.
Oh shit, guys, we're almost up against 2 hours, so probably a good time to wrap it up. I think when we hit donkey show, it's really time to.
let me end with one thing, Stuart. I've said this to Brent before. We said no politics, but I am libertarian. Freedom is my highest value. No matter what you think of military service, you were willing to die for my freedom, and that means an incredible amount to me. So thank you very much for your service.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm not going to talk about the military is a whole different conversation, but I appreciate that. I mean, you know, people say that all the time, and what I think when people say thank you for your service is they don't understand the amount of bullshit. It's almost like being a prisoner for however long you're in
I've
the
heard that
army.
so many
It's
times
like you're
before.
in. You volunteered to go be somebody else's bitch.
That's why I appreciate it. I mean, for real.
All right, guys, good time to wrap it. So, real quick, go around the room and tell everybody where the hell they can find you on the interwebs. Stuart, go. Will always be Twitter to me. All right, Rob.
Prosper, PROSPERCLT 2023, Prosper Charlotte. And I usually talk about politics or music are probably my two favorite topics. Consciousness is a personal study, but when I find smarter people than I am who can open up my eyes, I love getting the conversation. So
Right on, everybody. Thank you so much for pulling up. It's been a fascinating conversation. Always a pleasure, Stuart and Rob. You're becoming one of my repeat guests very, very quickly. I'm love talking to you. So thanks, guys, and we'll chat later.
take it easy.
Bye.